These Violent Delights, Chapter 13. Juliet smoothed down the fabric of her kipao, pressing it at the creases that were bunching up beneath her coat. She swallowed her discomfort in a hard gulp, as if there were nothing more than a bitter medicinal pill. It felt fraudulent, somehow, to put on this type of clothing that she hadn't worn in years. It felt like lying. To herself. To the image she had been building before she stepped foot back into this city. But if she wanted to blend in within Zhang Gutai's daytime place of work, she had to look like any regular upper-class 18-year-old clacking around these streets, with pearl earrings dangling in her loose, ungelled hair. Juliet took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the sleeves of her coat, and marched into the building. Zhang Gutai, as an important figure in a relatively new and fragile political party, was a secretive man. But he was also the chief editor of a newspaper called Labor Daily, and their address was public information. Though she hadn't expected to find such a scant office complex when she wandered out here into the industrial edges of the Chinese part of the city, she was met with the absolute bustle of activity in the Labor Daily's offices. People running around with bundles of paper and typewriters clutched in their arms as they yelled for the latest update on a batch that had proceeded forward into printing. Her nose wrinkling, Juliet walked right past the front desk with her chin held high. These people were communists, weren't they? They believed in equality, after all. She was sure she would also believe in letting Juliet take a look around by herself until she stumbled into Zhang Gutai's office. She wouldn't need anybody to show her around. Juliet smiled to herself. The thick of the activity seemed to be coming in and out of a little set of stairs dropping into a basement level, so Juliet went there, snagging a clipboard from a table in an effort to look occupied. There was no natural light when she entered the basement level. She passed what may have been a back door, then turned left, entering the main space and scanning the scene before her. The floor and walls were constructed of cement. The only illumination came from the few light fixtures latched to the walls, which seemed terribly inconvenient for all these people down here at their desks, squinting in the dimness. It reminded her of what cell blocks during the Great War might have looked like. Juliet supposed she wouldn't be at all surprised if it turned out this building really had been converted from an original use of holding prisoners. She continued striding forward, deeper into the prison-like office space, peering into each nook. Her heels were loud as she clicked through, but there was enough chaos down here that, for now, nobody thought much of her presence. Harried writers, both old and young, were busy scribbling, working fast on their typewriters, or taking phone calls. The wires that carried signals into the subterranean level were all tangled in a big mass at the back of the expansive space. As Juliet scanned the desks she passed, looking for anything of note, her attention snagged on one desk that appeared unoccupied. Such an observation was peculiar enough in this little bubble of activity. She was even more intrigued when she craned her neck to read the writing atop the folders beside the telephone and saw, in Chinese, "Memo for Zhang Gutai." Quickly, she scrambled beneath the desk, clipboard shoved under her arm so she could search through the files. There was nothing noteworthy in the political reports, but when she dropped to a crouch and looked to the floor of the desk, she found drawings. If everybody else is so busy, why is this desk empty? Juliet thought. And whose was it? Surely not Zhang Gutai, who most certainly had his own space. Shaking her head, she reached into the pile of drawings and pulled a few out, resolving not to look a gift horse in the mouth. But when she looked upon the first drawing, she broke out in a cold sweat, all the way from the high collar at her neck to the edges of her kipao brushing her ankles. One drawing was of wide, reptilian-like eyes. Another was of 5 claws gripping against a board of wood and scales somehow glistening despite the stray smears of ink along the pages. Juliet's fingers froze, stunned as she looked at the images, dozens of them, all depicting various variations of the same thing. Guai Wu, Juliet breathed. Monster. But before she could overthink it, she snatched one of the drawings in the pile, and one that depicted a blur of a creature standing in its entirety, and folded it up, tucking the little square of paper into her coat pocket. She joined the masquerade invitation that she had placed there yesterday and forgotten to remove. With a cursory glance around to make sure she was still in the clear, Juliet stood and wiped the sweat off her palms. She marched for a little steps out of the basement level. Her fist clutched tight. Juliet paused suddenly, her foot hovering on the top step. To her left again was the back door, and it was shuddering. Suddenly, all she could think of was the drawing in her pocket. She imagined a monster just on the other side of the door. breathing heavily, awaiting the prime moment to burst free and wreak havoc on innocence. Juliet stepped toward the door hesitantly. Her hand came down to rest on the round doorknob. "Hello?" she called, her voice hoarse. "Is someone... What are you doing there?" Juliet jumped, snatching her hand away from the knob of the door. The frame had stopped shuddering. She swiveled around. "Oh, me?" The man who stood before her wore a fedora cap. His suit more Western-looking than anyone else down here was wearing. He had to be someone important, along the lines of Zangutai Rink, rather than a mere assistant who answered the phone. "I'm here to see your chief of editor for important business," Juliet continued. "I got a little lost." "The exit is that way," the man said, pointing. Juliet's smile grew cold. "Official Scarlet business," she corrected. "My father, Lord Kai, sent me." There was a moment of pause as the man digested her words, wariness setting in. Juliet had perfected the art of dishonest guiles. She hid her identity when necessary, then wielded it like a weapon when the time came. Only the man suddenly looked a little amused, too much to Juliet's chagrin. Still, he nodded and gestured for her to follow him. There was one more floor above the first floor, and the man spared no patience in hurrying Juliet along. He ascended the humble brown staircase 3 steps at a time while Juliet clacked up slowly, looking around. This staircase, with its thick handrails and long polished panes, had the potential to be sweeping and decadent, if only the communists were not so intent on giving the appearance of seeming grounded with the common people. Everything in this building could have been glorious, but glory was not the point anymore, was it? Juliet leaned over the banister of the second floor with a sigh, peering at the frenzy of papers and typewriters below. When the man gestured at her impatiently from ahead, she grimaced and kept walking. The man turned a corner and directed her into a spacious waiting area. There were 2 rows of chairs there, both pressed up against opposing walls, facing each other in front of a closed office door. Juliet finally understood his amusement. There was already someone sitting on one of the yellow chairs, legs stretched out in front of him. Roma lurched upright. "What are you doing here?" they demanded in unison. The man in a fedora cap quietly removed himself. As soon as he was out of sight, Roma launched out of his seat and grabbed Juliet's arm. She was so offended he dared touch her that she couldn't react for a long second. Not until Roma had already moved them to a corner of the waiting space, the wall cold against Juliet's back. "Let go of me," she hissed, shaking her arm from his grip. Roma must have obtained the same information that she had. He wanted to know about Zangutai's involvement in the madness. Juliet bit back a curse. If the White Flowers got answers before she did, they would treat their findings like they treated the black market. They would do everything they could to secure a monopoly upon the information, pay off and kill sources until there was no way for the Scarlets to obtain what they knew. That way, only the White Flowers were safe, assuming there was a way to stop this madness. That way, the city only stacked up with the bodies of their enemies. Then people would begin to switch loyalties. Then the White Flowers would be victorious, and the Scarlets would suffer. "Look," Roma snapped. "You have to leave." Juliet blinked rapidly, her head rearing back. "I have to leave?" "Yes." Roma reached up, his expression dripping with derision, and flicked one of the earrings dangling from Juliet's ear. The pearls swung against her skin, brushing her jaw. Juliet barely stifled the whoosh of breath that threatened to escape, barely stifled the stream of fire she wanted to breathe from her throat. "Play dress up somewhere else," Roma went on. "I was here first. This is Scarlet territory. These people are communists. You have no sway over them." Juliet gritted her teeth, hard. And indeed, the Scarlet Gang had no control here. Her only consolation was that Roma didn't appear too happy himself, which meant the White Flowers had no sway over the communists either. For the time being, this neutrality was a good thing. The man in the fedora had shut his mouth immediately in learning Juliet's identity, precisely to avoid any unnecessary aggravation with the Scarlet Gang. But tiptoeing on thin ice wouldn't last forever. The communists' very model of progress was overthrowing Shanghai as it was now, as it was for gangsters to thrive, sinful, profitable. Given the choice between killing all the capitalists and killing all the gangsters, they would choose both. "Our relationship with the communists is, as always, none of your business," Juliet said. "Now, if you'd be so kind, get out of my face." Roma narrowed his eyes. He took her command as a threat. Perhaps she had intended for it to be one. "I'm not going anywhere." God, the nerve. Juliet straightened to her full height. They weren't that far apart, she and Roma. He barely held half an inch over her when she was in heels. "I won't say it again," she hissed. "Get out of my face. Now." His lips thinned. Resentfully and slowly, Roma submitted to the threat. He made a steady step back, glaring at her as he scrubbed a hand along his eyes. If Juliet didn't know better, she would have thought the gesture to be an act of self-consciousness. But no, it was exhaustion. The shadows under his eyes were almost smoky, like his bottom lashes were fringed with soot. "Have you been sleeping?" Juliet found herself asking suddenly. There was a direct correlation between her willingness to be civil and the distance between them. With him several strides away, she wanted to commit homicide a little less. Roma's hand returned to his side. "I'll have you know," he answered, "that I am well, thank you very much. I wasn't asking after your well-being." "Oh, give it a rest, Juliet." Juliet folded her arms thoughtfully. Last night she had heard the news about the sudden spike in white flower deaths, all lost to the madness. It was the biggest mass casualty yet, which meant Roma wasn't going to leave just because she made a few barbed remarks. He was here now precisely because this strange madness had crept so close to home. She tilted her chin at the closed door. "Is that his office?" Roma didn't need to clarify who she meant. He nodded. "Zangutai won't take visitors until the hour. Don't try anything." Like what? Juliet thought nastily. It wasn't as if she would run Roma out without making a scene and offending the communists, and she certainly refused to leave before she spoke to Zangutai to find answers. It was this or nothing. Juliet marched to a chair and sat down. She tipped her head back and stared at the ceiling, resolute not to look anywhere else. Directing her mind elsewhere, too, she reached into her coat pocket and fingered the drawing she had stashed away. It was uncertain whether those frightening sketches confirmed trouble with the communists specifically, but it confirmed something. She would have to inspect it further, because she thought she recognized the background to be the Bund. It was nothing more than a few harsh lines, but for somewhere as distinctive as the Bund, a few harsh lines were enough. Meanwhile, Roma had settled back into his seat along with the other rows of chairs, his fingers tapping to the tick, tick, tick of the clock on the wall. He kept his gaze pinned on Juliet, much to Juliet's annoyance. She could feel his inspection like it was a physical thing, as if he were inches instead of across the room. Every sweep of his eyes felt like he was mechanically pulling her apart, piece by piece, until her insides were out in the open for inspection. Juliet could feel a flush creeping up from her chest, coloring her neck with discomfort, and spreading all to her cheek until her cheeks were blazing hot. She was going to skin herself with her own damn knife. Her cells were betraying her on a molecular level. He was just looking, for heaven's sakes. It did not qualify as an attack. Juliet was not going to rise to the bait. She would sit here until Zangutai was ready to meet, and then... What? Juliet snapped, unable to bear it any longer. She tore her gaze down, finally supplying her own ammunition against Roma's weaponized stare. Roma made an inquisitive noise. He pursed his lips slowly, then tipped his chin. "What's got you so worked up?" Juliet followed the direction of his gesture. She yanked her hand out from her pocket. "Again, that would be none of your business." "If it is to do with the why would you assume that?" Roma's expression thundered. "Can I finish my sentence?" The door opened, cutting him off. A harried assistant came out and summoned Roma to go in before she quickly hurried away. With a huff, Roma shot Juliet a look that said, "This isn't over," before entering the office. Juliet broiled in the weight, her toes tapping erratically against the hard floor panels and her fingers twisting around one another. For 10 minutes she drove herself up the wall, envisioning Roma doing all in his power to convince Zangutai to give him all the answers and disregard Juliet. Roma was a liar through and through. His tactics of persuasion knew no bounds. When Roma came out, however, it was immediately clear in the slouch of his head that he hadn't gotten what he wanted. "Don't look so smug," he whispered while Juliet passed him. "That's just my face," she hissed back. With her chin held high, Juliet walked into Zangutai's office. "Well, it must be my lucky day," Mr. Zhang declared when she entered, putting his fountain pen down. Despite his laudatory tone, he was frowning as he spoke. First, it was the heir of the white flowers, now the Scarlet Crown Princess. What can I do for you, Miss Kai? Juliet flopped into one of the two large chairs placed opposite Mr. Zhang's heavy mahogany desk. In seconds, she took in everything before her. The framed black and white photographs of his elderly parents, the hammer and sickle flag hanging from the side of the filing cabinet, the festive red calendar on the wall marked with daily meetings. Her eyes returning to the communist before her, Juliet relaxed and made him see what she wanted him to see, letting out a careless, small laugh. Vacuous as could be. You know how rumors work in this city, Mr. Zhang, she said. She held her nails out in front of her, squinting at a little chip marring her pinky. They come to me, and I follow them. Do you know what graced my ear the other day? Zhang Gutai appeared mildly entertained. Do tell. They say, Juliet leaned in, that you know why there is madness sweeping through Shanghai. For a long moment, Mr. Zhang said nothing. Then he blinked rapidly and replied, Miss Kai, I haven't a clue why you would think that. No, Juliet said lightly. You didn't scheme up a madness to spread through the city? No plans at all to cause enough death until the gangsters were weak and the workers were frightened, until the factories had ripened into the ideal conditions for the communists to swoop in and incite revolution? She digested his surprise, his astonishment at being confronted. Roma must not have asked him about the madness directly. He must have approached it with a more roundabout way, treading the waters to gather his conclusions instead of coming right out and saying it. That was to be expected. The direct approach was more of Juliet's arena. Miss Kai, Zhang Gutai said sternly, that is absurd. Juliet wasn't getting anywhere like this. She straightened in her chair and dropped her smile, her hands gripping the armrests. Now the easy flapper girl was gone. In her place sat the heiress of the most brutal gang in Shanghai. I will find the truth one way or another, Juliet said. So speak now if you wish to be offered mercy, else I will tear the answers from you limb by limb. Miss Kai, I truly have no clue what you're speaking of, Mr. Zhang interrupted. Please leave now. This is a place of work, and I won't have your ridiculous accusations taking up my time. Juliet considered her options. Mr. Zhang Gutai's words were convincing, but he was uneasy. Unless he was a very, very good actor, he was no liar. But he kept glancing to the door, and he kept tapping his hand against the flat of his desk. Why? What did he know that she didn't? Even if he did not scheme the madness, what was his involvement? Juliet leaned back in her seat, relaxing her spine again into a false ease. And what if I have questions on the Communist Party? She asked. You are the Secretary General, are you not? You are welcome to attend our meetings if you wish to know about the party, Mr. Zhang answered stiffly. Otherwise, Miss Kai, please leave. Juliet stood, taking her sweet time to stretch and work out the cricks in her neck. Then, bobbing a deep and exaggerated curtsy, she simpered. Thank you for your gracious time. She left the office. What now? She thought. Closing the door behind her with a quiet click, she started to walk. If he won't... Oof! Juliet staggered back, her head spinning as she rounded the corner and immediately collided hard with someone. The moment she looked up to see who the hell was in her path, she could only see red. Roma caught her wrist before her hand could come down on him. He held her mid-motion, their arms crossed like they were exchanging sword blows. Careful, Roma said quietly. His voice was too soft for her violence brewing under Juliet's skin. It was trickery. He was trying to divert her attention to his lips and breathe and calm instead of whatever was going on here, and his harsh grip carving grooves into her wrist, and it was working. Juliet wanted to kill him for that alone. Rama gave a mocking smile, like he knew what she was thinking. Wouldn't want to make a scene in a communist stronghold, would you? Juliet tried to tug her arm back, but Roma held firm. If he didn't let go in 3 seconds, she was drawing her gun. 1, 2... Roma let go. Juliet rubbed her wrist, smoothing a palm over her raging pulse, and grumbling something inaudible under her breath. When Roma simply stood there, she demanded, Why are you still here? Innocently, Roma pointed over to the chairs. I left my hat behind. You weren't even wearing a hat before. But indeed, on the chair where he had originally been sitting, a hat was lying on its side. Roma, shrugging, merely went to pick it up. Juliet pivoted on her heel and left as fast as she could, hurrying from the building. It wasn't until she was halfway down the road, pulling her coat tightly around her, that she stopped in her tracks, swearing. He better not have. She plunged her hand into her pocket and came out with only one slip of paper. But when she unfolded it, she saw that the monster was still staring back at her, lines hazy with folding and refolding. Juliet snorted. Roma had taken the masquerade invitation instead. Fool, she muttered. When Juliet returned home, she found Kathleen already lounging on one side of the couches in the living room. She went to join her cousin, complaining under her breath. "What's wrong?" Kathleen asked absently, flipping the pages of her magazine. "A lot of things," Juliet grumbled. "Did you find the address?" Kathleen made a motion with her head that resembled a half nod. "Sort of. I'll have it in a few days." "Good enough," Juliet muttered. "I've got the masquerade to worry about until then anyway." A headache was starting in the space behind her ears. She was trying to plot her next move, but it was hard to decide where to look. There had to be a reason why Madame had heard what she heard. There had to be a reason why the communists had said what they said. And if it was not but a rumor, then Juliet could only put her suspicion to rest when she had exhausted every avenue to do with Zangutai. Juliet perked up slightly. Her hand reached into her pocket again, touching the drawing. She had yet to exhaust everything. A whistle came from the front door then, interrupting Juliet's silent brooding. She looked up to find a scarlet messenger hovering at the foyer space, gesturing at her with one hand, fixing the fit of his shoe with the other. "Pass me that parcel beside you." Juliet looked to her side. Instead, a parcel was lying in the circular table beside the sofa she had chosen to collapse on. But what did the messenger think he was doing asking her to fetch him something that he could simply come get himself? It clicked. The Kipao. The Scarlet Gangsters had become accustomed to shortcutting their association to her glittery beaded dress and pomade on her finger-curled hair. As soon as she dressed in Chinese clothing instead, they saw right past her. Juliet breathed in and found her lungs to be horribly tight. Could she never be both? Was she doomed to choose one country or the other, be an American girl or nothing? The messenger whistled again. "Hey!" Juliet yanked out the knife sheathed in her thigh right before the slit of her kipao ended, and threw it. The blade embedded perfectly in the front door with a deep, sonorous thud. It drew a single drop of blood from the messenger's ear where it had cut through. "You don't whistle at me," Juliet said coldly. "I whistle at you, understand?" The messenger looked at her. Really looked at her now. He reached up and touched his ear. The bleeding had already stopped, but his eyes were as wide as he nodded. Juliet took the parcel in her hands and stood. She walked right up to the messenger, passed it to him quaintly, as if she were delivering a lunchbox to her friend. "While you're at it," she said, "I need you to do something for me. Go to the Bund and interview the bankers who work along the main strip. Ask whether they've seen something funny lurking around them." The messenger's mouth opened and closed. "All of them?" "All of them." "But, Juliet, hold on," Kathleen called, rising from the couch too. "Let me." Juliet raised an eyebrow. Kathleen waved a hand at the messenger in a shooing gesture, and the messenger took the opportunity to flee, closing the front door with him with the knife still embedded within it. "You want to waste your time on this?" Juliet asked. "It is not wasting my time if it is useful information you need." Kathleen reached into the coat rack by the door. "Why are you chasing after it?" "I can send any one of the other messengers," Juliet continued, wrinkling her brow. Ordering her own cousin around didn't sit well with her. A specific task with specific goals was one matter, especially if Kathleen had contacts that benefited the mission. Sending her on a wild goose chase was another matter entirely. "Juliet, I was mostly trying to frighten the messenger. It really is quite all right." Kathleen grabbed her cousin's wrist and squeezed. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough for Juliet to know that this was serious. "I'm not just doing this out of the kindness of my heart," she said firmly. "In some few years, this gang is either under your hands or someone else's, and knowing the other contenders..." Kathleen paused. Their heads went both to the same people. Tyler first, then perhaps the other various cousins who might have a fighting chance, only if Tyler mysteriously disappeared. They were all terrible and ruthless and hateful, but Juliet was too. The minuscule difference was that Juliet was also careful, intensely controlling with how much of that hate she let slip out to guide her hand. "It could be under your hands, too," Juliet said lightly. "We don't know what's going to happen in a few years." Kathleen rolled her eyes. "I'm not a Kai, Juliet. That's not even in the realm of possibility." There was a little to argue back against that. Kathleen came from Lady Kai's side of the family. When Lord Kai was the face of the Scarlet Gang, it was unsurprising that only these sharing his name were seen to be legitimate. One only had to look at how easily his fellow cousins merged into the inner circle, while Mr. Lang, Lady Kai's brother, still had not won any favor in the 2 decades he had been around. "It has to be you," Kathleen said. Her tone did not allow for dissent. "Everyone who may come from your crown is dangerous, and you are too, but—" She took a moment to think through her phrasing. "But at least you will never willingly bring danger inward just to soothe your pride. You're the only one I trust to hold this gang together as a steady steel structure, rather than grappling hierarchy of whims. If you fail to be a good heir, if you fall, then this way of life falls. Let me do this for you." Juliet's mouth opened, then closed, when all she could manage was a meek, "Okay." Her cousin snorted. The serious spell broke. Kathleen shrugged her coat on. "So, why do you need to know about the bankers at the Bund?" Juliet was still mulling over her cousin's words. She had always thought of herself as the heir of the Scarlet Gang. But that wasn't at all, was it? She was the heir of her father's version of the Scarlet Gang. And was that so great? This Scarlet Gang was unraveling at its very seams. Perhaps a different one could have won a blood feud with the White Flowers generations ago. Perhaps a different one could have stopped the madness by now. "Rumors of a monster," Juliet answered aloud, shaking herself out of her head. There were so many loose pieces floating around. A monster, a madness, the communist. She had to focus on aligning them, not doubting herself. "I've reason to believe they might have witnessed something. My hopes aren't high, but a smidgen of it exists at least." Kathleen nodded. "I'll report back with what I find." With that, her cousin waved goodbye and shut the door after her, the sound echoing back into the living room. The knife looked rather comical, moving with the door like that. Juliet sighed and yanked it out, tucking the blade into her dress as she trudged up the stairs. Her parents were going to be horrified to find a gouge in the front door. She smiled at the thought and remained rather amused, until she entered her room and spotted a lone figure on her bed. Juliet almost jumped 2 feet in the air. "Oh, heavens, you scared me!" she gasped a moment later. The sisters were hardly ever in her room separately, so she hadn't immediately identified Rosalind, especially not while her cousin had her face inclined toward the beam of afternoon sun cutting through the window. "Are you and your sister both insistent on surprising me today?" Rosalind looked a little miffed as she turned to Juliet. "You were with Kathleen just now? I've been waiting for you here for hours." Juliet blinked. She wasn't sure what to say. "I'm sorry," she settled on, though her apology was confused and as a result disingenuous. "I didn't know." Rosalind shook her head and muttered, "No matter." This was one of the details that Juliet remembered from their childhood, before anyone left for the Western world. Rosalind carried grudges like it was a contest. She was passionate and headstrong and had nerves of steel, but when you looked past her well-chosen surface-level pretty words, she could also simmer on feelings long past their relevance. "Don't grouch at me," Juliet tutted. She had to address it now, or fear its flare-up long into the distant future. She knew her cousin and bore witness to Rosalind's slow-building hatred toward the people who upset her, toward her maternal aunts who tried to take the place of her dead mother, toward her father who valued the strengthening of his guanxi in the Scarlet Gang more than he valued caring for his children, even toward her fellow dancers at the burlesque club who were jealous enough with Rosalind's growing star status that they tried to exude her from their circles. Sometimes Juliet wondered how Rosalind even managed to cope with so much absence in her life, and at that thought she felt a little bad for not checking in with her cousin more often. Though she hadn't been back in the city for that long, everyone knows she had more important things to be going on with the Kai family. Kathleen, at least, erred on the side of optimism. Rosalind did not. Not constant care and outreach to your cousins was not a high priority when people were ripping at their own throats on the streets outside. What's wrong? Juliet asked anyway. She could at least spare a minute if Rosalind had been waiting there for hours. Rosalind didn't respond. For a moment, Juliet almost feared that she had absolved the burgeoning grudge. Then, all of a sudden, Rosalind dropped her face in her hands. There was something haunting about that motion that struck Juliet to its core. Something childlike and lost. Insects, Rosalind whispered, her words muffled into her palm. Now a coldness had settled in the room. Juliet felt all the little hairs in the back of her neck lift, standing so ramrod straight that her skin almost felt sensitive, sore to the touch. So many of them, Rosalind continued. Every crack of her cousin's voice sent a new shiver down Juliet's spine. So many of them, all coming from the sea, all going back into the sea. Slowly, Juliet managed to lower herself into a kneel on the carpet. She craned her neck to meet her cousin's drooped, terrified stare. What do you mean? Juliet asked softly. What insects? Rosalind shook her head. I think I saw it. I saw it in the water. It still didn't answer the question. Saw what? Juliet tried clarifying again. When Rosalind yet remained quiet, Juliet reached out and took her by the arms, demanding, Rosalind, what did you see? Rosalind inhaled sharply. In that one motion, as if she were tucked all the oxygen out of the room, sucked out all the possibility that whatever she had witnessed could be something casually explained away. A second heartbeat was starting up along Juliet's skull, a pressure building from within to listen, brace, prepare. Somehow she knew what she was about to hear was going to change everything. Rosalind, Juliet prompted one final time. Silver eyes. Rosalind finally choked out with a shudder. Now that she started speaking, it was coming out in a tumble. Her breathing grew increasingly shallow, and Juliet's grip grew increasingly tight. Her fingers still clasped about Rosalind's arms. Her cousin barely seemed to notice. It had silver eyes, and a curved spine, and sharp ridges, and scales, and claws, and I don't know, Juliet. I don't know what it is. Guan Wu may be a monster. A roar started to sound in Juliet's ears. With careful control, she pried her hands away from her cousin, then reached into her coat, retrieving the drawing she had stolen. She unfolded the torn sheet, smoothing out the lines of ink smeared upon it. Rosalind, Juliet said slowly, look at this drawing. Rosalind reached for the thin piece of paper. Her fingers tightened upon it. Her eyes filled with tears. Is that what you saw? Juliet whispered. Ever so slowly, Rosalind nodded.